Well, here in our Creating Healthy Relational Boundaries series, our goal, as we said last week, is to help create the best possible relationships that we can. Like I was saying in the children's time, God loves us and wants us to be our best selves, whether we're 5 or 95. God wants us to love and be loved in the best ways possible. And that involves relationship, whether we're talking about relationship with God or relationship with one another. Last week, I talked about how we can create boundaries for ourselves as individuals. If we're boundaryless, we allow people to walk all over us, or we're the ones who do the walking. I gave the examples of no boundary Charlie Brown, who gets used time and time again, especially by Lucy in their relationship. Neither one of them exercise good personal boundaries, whether it's Lucy giving him advice for her own profit or pulling the football time and time again. And of course, the relationship cycle, this time it's going to be different. And yet, it never is, because they never make the changes that they need to make. At the same time, we talked about this. When we have boundaries that are too thick, so thick that it's as if we wear emotional armor that makes any real relationship possible. And we also talked about 1 Corinthians and how it uses the metaphor of the body to emphasize the need for us to have a sense of self as individuals that are also part of a whole. Verse 27 says, "Now you are the body of Christ and individually members of it." Maintaining individual boundaries is necessary for both the healthiness of the self and the healthiness of the community. So we left off, and I gave a teaser. I gave a teaser this week, and I talked about laundry. We'll get there in a little bit. T-shirts and this. I don't tell farm stories, Ralph. I tell laundry stories. I didn't grow up on a farm. I didn't grow up in a laundromat either, but anyway, I'll tell a laundry story. We're going to talk about how we can create the best relationships we can by being the best selves we can. We talked about this idea of self-differentiation. And self-differentiation is hard to define, so we're going to talk about the ways in which it's manifest when we act in certain relationships. And so self-differentiated, we can do these things. We can define ourselves while still being in touch with others. We're going to talk a lot about that today. We can draw boundaries with the toxic people in our lives. We can be decisive. We can take healthy risks, knowing that if we fail, that does not define who we are as God's beloved children. We can disagree with one another about things and recognize the differences of opinion are not necessarily relationship breakers. Our politicians have a lot to learn here. And we can respond rather than react. Okay, so life is this. We want to be separate. We need to be separate. God has created us to be distinct, yet we still are created for relationship with others. And it's a balancing act. It's a tension. How can we be separate yet close? How do we draw those boundaries that are not so thick that people can't get through, yet have boundaries so that we can honor who God has made us to be? How do we do this tension in life? As I started to think about this, I recognize, when I talk about self-differentiation, I'm talking about family systems model. And family systems start at home. Makes sense, right? And so when we think about family systems, these are the systems that are most profound to us, because those are our most profound points of connection. You know, when we just did a family dedication, a parent-child dedication up here, and when I think about this developmentally for a wee one, Landon he's at that stage where, what are his boundaries like? It's him and mom. And maybe Pastor Pam. But definitely not Jason. He set his boundaries, and that's okay. But you ever notice how a toddler, as a child starts to develop, it's everything at the beginning is just about the child and mama. That's the world of the child. And then the child starts to crawl, And you know that crawling and then looking back? Are you still there? And then toddling, are you looking back? Are you still there? Throughout adolescence, get to the keys to the car. I don't know how much looking back there is then, but it's that constant act. And it goes into adulthood. How do we honor these relationships that we have in life? How do we be who God has created us to be and still have good relationships, good connections with others? So I started to think about this, and I started to think about it biblically. And I realized that even though I think of Jesus as the most self-differentiated example that I've ever read about or known, at the beginning of his ministry, before this is seen as Jesus' launch in the Gospel of John. He's at the wedding of Cana. I talked about this earlier, right, with the kids. Check this out, and look at the family dynamics, because before we get to that water to wine party trick, there's some important things that happen. Listen to this. On the third day, there was a wedding at Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine gave out, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." Right away, I find this fascinating. Jesus' mom is making a request, it seems like, but she's not really making a request, is she? She's doing that sort of roundabout thing. Jesus, they have no wine. Not, Jesus, I know you could make some wine for all these folks, but Jesus, they have no wine. She's not really owning it. She's not being forthright and honest with Jesus. I don't want to be too hard on Mary. To be the mother of the Messiah must have been hard work, right? She must have felt bad for the host. Maybe that was it, right? When the wine runs out, that's on the host. It looks bad for the host. Maybe she was trying to help them save face. Maybe she was just trying to show off her boy for everybody to see. We don't really know. Whatever her reason was, check out how Jesus reacts. She says, "They have no wine." He says, "Woman, what concern is that to you and me? My hour has not yet come." Is that any way to talk to your mother? This is not hyperbole. This is the way the story is written. Woman, what concern is that to me and to you? Wow. And it does seem like this, right? Not now, Ma. I got other stuff that I'm interested in doing. Jesus sounds a little bit more than irritated, right? Maybe it's the way she asked the question, this roundabout way. Maybe this had happened before. We don't know. Maybe they'd been arguing on the way to the party. We've all been there, right? But clearly, there's a relational dynamic at work. And then, Jesus' mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Now standing there were 6 stone water jars for the Jewish rites of purification, each holding 20 or 30 gallons. Jesus said to them, "Fill the jars with water." So let me get this straight. Mary implies that Jesus should do something. Jesus tells her, "I'll do something when I darn well want to do something." So she turns to the servants and says, "Get it ready." And Jesus does it, and the rest is history. Clearly, mother always does know best, right? Here's my question for us, though. Do any of these dynamics look remotely familiar? Jesus and his mom sorting out their relationship. It's this, we talked about the separate yet close and connected. It's this constant push and pull negotiation that we're going through all the time. How am I separate? How am I connected? Mary pulling Jesus, Jesus pushing back, and then Jesus pulling and doing what she had requested. So when we think about self-differentiation, we think about this family systems theory. It was originally coined by a guy named Bowen. And so it's called Bowen Family Systems Theory. It's a theory of human behavior that views the family as an emotional unit. And it talks about how we do things as systems in the interaction. That's what really drives how things go in a congregation, in a business, in an organization, even in a country. Because what starts at home is what we live and project out into the world. That's how we act when we go forward. And so last week I said that this family systems model was not only important to me, not only interesting to me, I said it actually saved ministry for me. I would not be a pastor if not for this way of thinking and understanding why y'all do the things y'all do, why we do the things that we do, all of us together. And so let's take a look. I want to probe a little. We're going to go back to the self-differentiation thing, and I want to give a few examples along the way so we can begin to wrap our heads around this. And so again, I would encourage you to think about this as you think about your families. I would encourage you to think about this as you think about your workplace, networks of friends that you have. Who plays these roles in your systems, in the circles in which you live and work? Going back to that first one. Self-differentiated, we can define ourselves while still being in touch with others. Self-differentiation is the ability to be grounded and boundaried in who we are while still being connected to others, even in emotionally charged situations. We're at our best when we're distinct yet connected. An excellent example of defining ourselves while still being connected happened in this very congregation 12, 18 months ago. And I'll think about this as a communal kind of self-differentiation. We were threatened as a congregation with punishment for our stance on openness to all. Others in our district, in the denomination, didn't agree with that. And so they were discussing ways that they could punish we pastors, but indirectly punish us as a congregation. Though we were upset as a congregation, here's what we did. We sat down, we identified people who could be very articulate, and we asked them to write a theological treatise, essentially, for why we are where we are theologically. Why we feel like openness to all is the way that we follow Jesus. We wrote that, and then we handed it to our brothers and sisters in the district and the denomination, and we said, this is who we are, this is where we're at. We didn't cut them off. We didn't jump up and down. We didn't make threats about leaving. We understood our boundaries, but we still came toward. We still came toward those who we were in relationship with at that district and denominational level. That is a great example of being self-differentiated, defining ourselves and who we are while still being in touch with others. So this can mean taking a stand on something. It can be drawing a firm boundary. But it definitely doesn't take that attitude that I think we get sucked into sometimes, that is, we draw that boundary and then we say, well, fine, I don't care. You do whatever you do. I could care less about you. Or that person's dumb. I don't care. I'm not going to listen to them. I'm just going to cut them off. I'm not going to talk to them. Right? We have more sophisticated ways we talk about that. That's the junior high approach, right? We have more sophisticated ways that we mask that same kind of behavior, though. So, self-differentiated, we can define ourselves while still being in touch with others. Next, self-differentiated, we can draw boundaries with toxic people in our lives. We all have them. We all have them. And it's easier said than done. I'll say this, and this might sound weird because pastors are supposed to talk about love and acceptance and all this all the time. There are some times when you just have to move on. There are some times when you have to draw that boundary that protects yourself, especially if you're in a relationship that is abusive one way or the other. That's okay. That's allowed. It may be appropriate at times to cut somebody off altogether, at least for the time being. And contrary to the way we think about it, sometimes we think, we can fix the person, right? That if we focus all of our energy on that person, or if everybody in the system focuses all of our energy on that person, we can get them turned around and going the right way. Rarely works. Hardly ever works that way. You may think back to that story I told last week about a young woman who came from a toxic extended family. So she moved across the country. She got herself together. She got educated. She got a job. She was living a very healthy life. What happened was the toxic extended family back home actually started to rise to her level, even though she was thousands of miles away. She didn't cut them off. She was still in contact. She still came home for visits. She said, "This is where I'm at. This is my boundary." And they started to rise to her level. Family systems theory would tell us that it's more effective to work on oneself and with other motivated people in the system rather than focus on the so-called problem person or toxic person. So that's what we do when we're well self-differentiated. We get ourselves together. And these toxic people, they will tell us we're being selfish. They will tell us we're self-centered. They'll even call us mean. But when we do this, it will create a healthier us and give them the opportunity to rise to that level of health as well. Next, self-differentiated. We can be decisive, we can take healthy risks, and we can know that if we fail, it does not define us as children of God. Rabbi Edwin Friedman, he was one of the originators of this family or systems theory, one of my favorite authors. He started his career in counseling. He worked with families. And then as he worked with more and more families, people in corporations and even the military started to realize that he was onto something. So he became a consultant of sorts to these big Fortune 500 companies and to groups like the Navy. And he would go in and he would talk about their emotional connections. Can you imagine? Talking with these military head honchos about their emotional connections with one another. He found that one of the predominant symptoms of dysfunction is the inability to make decisions. Now, I know we all get tangled in whether or not a decision is going to be the right decision, whether or not a decision is going to be the perfect decision. And then we defer to data and technique and the experts. And we do that to the point at which we become utterly paralyzed because we have all this data and all these instructions about technique. And we got this expert telling us this and the other expert telling us that. Friedman says that you can have all the most accurate data in the world and all the greatest technique in the world and all the most sophisticated and intelligent experts telling you what to do. And that won't necessarily guarantee success. You can do all that and you can still fail. Friedman argues that the real power for moving forward in a healthy way, as individuals and as systems, is decisiveness, a spirit of adventure, and I would add, a quest to follow God's call. Because even if you have data that's a little bit inaccurate, even if you may have gone with the wrong expert this particular time, if you've been decisive, if you've owned it, if you have moved forward in a healthy way with a spirit of adventure, that God is in this and we're going to be all right in the end, 99% of the time you will be. And you move forward. Mistakes may be made, but they will not define us. Next. Self-differentiated. I'm going to go with the last two, actually. We can disagree with one another about things and recognize that differences of opinion are not relationship breakers. Sorry, I missed the nod in there. And we can respond rather than react. Now, I could easily point back to that case with the district and the denomination when we took a stand. We decided that we knew that we could disagree, and that didn't have to be a deal breaker. But I want to tell a story that's a little more fun, actually. So I'm a person, one of the benefits of growing up in a single-parent household is that you learn to do all kinds of things at a younger age than you might otherwise. Because in this case, my mom relied on me. I was the oldest. My mom relied on me to do some things. So I'd been doing my own laundry before I got married for decades. Quite literally. I was good at it. I knew how to do laundry, and I had a system. If you know me, I've been talking about systems. I love systems. I'm a systems guy. And so I had this method for doing laundry that was efficient, and it was effective. I could nail the laundry. I was really good at laundry. Still am. I'm going to brag a little bit. We also know that when we get married, it's give and take, right? It's that separate but close thing. There's that tension that exists there. You got to be more flexible. And so, all right, that's cool. I can do that. So, in the beginning of our marriage, Karen and I had laundry that we would do. And I'm glad she's in the room for this, by the way, so she can correct anything I had to say. We would alternate who might do the laundry. I might do it this week, she might do it that week. It might depend on what else was going on in our lives. But we didn't have a ton of laundry, right? So it didn't matter that much. Well, as our family grew, you know how this works, right? Your family grows, the laundry pile grows quite a bit. And so this is right about when we moved back to Elizabethtown. Our family was really growing, and the kids were getting bigger, clothes were getting bigger, more and more laundry. And so I was working these pastor's hours, which can be all kinds of crazy hours, early morning, evening meetings, all that good stuff. And so we were fortunate that Karen was able to stay home. And so Karen volunteered. She said, laundry will be my thing. Cool, that's great, love it, no problem. Then one day, we're just sort of chatting, and Karen says, so what's up with the inside-out t-shirts? And I thought, I don't know. What's up with the inside-out t-shirts? And she explained to me that the laundry pile was never ending. It'd be really helpful with all my clothes, but my t-shirts especially, if when I took them off, I could turn them right side out. So that didn't have to be another step in the process, right? There's so much of this stuff. Well, I have to confess that what happens next was not my smartest, nor my most sensitive, or my least reactive. Talk about responding rather than reacting. Responding is good. Responding is taking a beat and then going into it. Reacting is right there. Well, I can be a little argumentative, and I was feeling a little defensive for whatever reason that day. And so I explained in great detail my system for doing laundry. Why I didn't turn t-shirts right side out. And I might have mentioned a couple other things that she could do to improve how she did the laundry. And that's the story of how I started doing my own laundry again. That's true. I do my own laundry. Well, Kai and I do it together. 2 lessons for me here. I was reactive. I was defensive. I took it personally for some crazy reason. When Karen mentioned what could be helpful for her, that was a very mature thing. You know what would be helpful for me? If you turn your t-shirts right side out. So now I have to say, Greg, what was that all about? Why 0 to 60? What's going on there? That's that self-differentiation work that I needed to do. And in all seriousness, we did decide that doing our own laundry separately was the way to go. Kai and I do ours. Karen does hers with the girls. Sometimes it rotates around. And I will say this too, to the point about being able to disagree. Our love, I can't see Karen, our love can withstand differences in how we apply bleach, when, where, at what time in the cycle, how much. It can withstand the merits of turning a t-shirt right side out or inside out. What temperature to set the dryer at? It's been another biggie. These are secrets for a great marriage, by the way. I wish that we had 3 more weeks, that we could talk about all these things in great detail, about what it is to be self-differentiated. They may sound like no-brainers when we talk about them in a non-threatening sort of circumstance, but I would encourage you, I would invite you to think about these things. We post all this stuff on YouTube. The minute after service ends, it's posted to YouTube. You find stuff like this online, find it. Look at it. Ask yourself, am I doing these things? When am I doing these things? And when am I not doing these things? What are my triggers that send me down that path when I don't do it? Because we recognize that God wants us to be the best individuals we can, to have the most loving relationships that we can have with God and with one another. So next week, we're going to pick up. Pastor Jason is going to talk about relationships and relational boundaries that we can set in smaller groups of people. And we hope you'll join us again for that.